All right, greetings everybody. It is I, obviously, Jesus, here with the first Patreon video for the month of March 2019. Seems like daylight savings time has just stolen an entire day or a half a day from me, so I want to make this quick. I gotta go to bed, I gotta get up, I gotta do a fucking concert, I gotta do a lot of shit. So, anyway, I'm obviously Jesus, and today let's talk about friendship or the lack thereof. Because much of my life, especially my adult life, I have lived without friendship. I have mentioned this fact in previous videos, but I've never really done a deep dive into it, so that's what I want to do now. I'm going to cover my personal history with, different friendships and different levels of friendship that I've had throughout my life, and my thoughts on, their role for other people and for myself, and then I'll have a little bit at the end where I discuss the idea of online friendships as a replacement for, in real life IRL interactions. So, anyway, getting right into it. Growing up served as the model for my friendships, as you might imagine, considering that, all that formative stuff happens back then. I had friends in school. I had people that I was acquainted with. I got along generally with mostly everybody. And I had some closer friends in school, but I saw, very few people, especially as I got even just a little bit older, like even just through, later years of elementary school or primary school, as you would call it here or I call it over in the UK, but we call it elementary school here in America. But yeah, even as I got to the fifth and sixth grades, I really didn't see anybody outside of school, and this was because of a few factors. The primary one just being that of course, as you might imagine, I preferred staying inside and playing video games to most of the physical activities that the kids in my neighborhood were doing, playing sports and all that stuff. So and this characterized most of my relationships, as I said, from a very young age, like kindergarten age, all the way through 12th grade. So for a time, when I was younger, when Star Wars was big, especially, the kids in the neighborhood and myself would have, mock lightsaber battles, because I think that was like around the time when the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones came out, and we were just kids. We didn't realize that those two movies were fucking absolutely terrible. So we'd have our mock lightsaber battles with the lightsaber toys that everybody's parents were buying for them at that time. That kind of died off, and they became interested in slightly more traditional and more adulty things, like just doing sports and playing in just playing sports, generally speaking, was the thing for the kids in my neighborhood. When they sort of outgrew the nerdy stuff. And pretty much the same thing happened to me in the sort of after school program I went to as a kid, because my parents were both working especially after they got divorced. So my dad would be at work and my mom would be at work. So I would go to this after school program. But everybody there, it was for younger kids. So I aged out of it eventually. And even while I was there, everybody got tired of playing fucking Yu-Gi-Oh or whatever the popular thing at the time was. It was Pokemon, and then it was Yu-Gi-Oh, and then the people who still stayed into card games, got into Magic generally. I wish I had just gotten into Magic the Gathering from the beginning. I think it was one of the things that my mother had forbade including Harry Potter because of her, sort of fair weather commitment to Catholicism at the time. But generally speaking, everybody got tired of the card games, and they moved on into sports stuff as the older echelon of people in that program. So the same thing kind of happened with my the neighborhood kids I knew from school and the people I would go to that after school program with. And it wasn't like I completely lacked for cerebral friends. I remember I had one or two friends that I would sit at my desk with in fifth and sixth grade. Why is that so hard to say? Into like 11th grade. Back in fifth and sixth grade, we were the kind of kids who literally learned the Phoenician alphabet for fun, just for shits and giggles. So I did have like a small circle of friends like that I retained into like 11th grade. Obviously, we weren't still writing in the Phoenician alphabet for no fucking reason, but I switched schools, as I've talked about previously in other videos, in 11th grade, like just completely in the middle of 11th grade. And so I lost touch with all of them as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. The second factor that prevented me from having any sort of really long-term friendships was that, especially after my parents got divorced, well, actually, completely after my parents got divorced, I started moving around between places quite a bit. So I always stayed in the same school district. That was very important, and I guess I kind of appreciate that. Until I wanted to switch schools, I didn't have to switch schools, even though my parents got divorced and my mother lived in a different town. But I was a part of a shared custody agreement, so I started moving around quite a bit when I was age 8, and that continued through most of my school years. Meaning there was no real incentive or even the ability to form really strong relationships when I was bouncing between my parents' different households. So half the week I would be in an entirely different city. Not that the where I grew up was particularly big or that was far away, but it's not like I could drive myself. And that was not really something I was interested in anyway. So the possibility of forming any relationships, even if I had been interested, was essentially precluded. I think I honestly lived in like 8 different places between ages 8 and 16 across 4 different cities, 3 of which were together and 1 of which was kind of far out of the way. But another thing that sort of complicated this was that I never really liked going to other people's houses, and even further, I disliked the idea of people coming into my own house and seeing my room. So, the idea of playing outside, once that was outgrown, and once we were not, just running around the neighborhood having lightsaber battles, there really wasn't much to do except to, play on Xbox with the people I knew from school rather than, meet them in person and do anything, in an IRL capacity. But, unlike a lot of stuff from my childhood, I'm not really necessarily saying this as, trying to portray myself as the victim of something that was done to me. This really isn't something that my parents failed to encourage in me. I mean, they didn't really push for it, but, they also recognized that this wasn't really something that I was into, forming, in real life friendships and, having, physical activities rather than just talking to people that I knew, from school or whatever on Xbox and, playing Call of Duty with them or what have you. And in the end, this is something I'm actually quite happy with, and is probably one of the things that I have the least reservations and regrets about from my childhood. And I'm really quite happy that I developed the preferences about friendship that I did, because friendship to me has essentially become entirely optional in a way that it isn't for most people, and I honestly find that freeing. Like, as I talked about earlier, even when I lost touch with the friends who were more like me that I had when I was in 5th and 6th grade all the way to 11th grade when I switched schools, I didn't really make any effort to maintain that connection, because friendship to me is essentially sort of just like this purely, transient thing that's based on convenience and proximity. You have these people that you share interests with, and you see them on a specific basis, and they make the, having to be at school or, as you get into your adult years, work better. So you have friends in that capacity, and then you go home, and then you each have your own individual lives, and then you come back and you just do that day in, day out for as long as you happen to be, in the on the same routine, essentially. So that's what essentially friendship was to me, and I think that is kind of freeing in a way. So, throughout the rest of my high school times and, early college, I mostly just made acquaintances. I was lucky in that I got along with pretty much everybody, every social group. I was never bullied. I never had a strong enough bond with any, group of people like the nerds or the band kids or whatever that my identity ever got wrapped up in being part of that social group. I essentially just kept everybody at arm's length and sort of floated on the surface of everything. And, like I said, I was really just friends with whomever happened to be there at the time in a sort of limited acquaintance type capacity, and that served me fairly well. But things did change a little bit when I got older and went to college. Finally, I befriended a group of people initially who were, we were all bonded by the fact that we were all commuters to the school, so we actually had our own designated space on campus to, congregate and hang out between classes or whatever, because obviously we couldn't go back to dorm rooms between classes or anything, so we had this little commuter lounge, essentially. So I befriended a group of people who were part of the sort of commuter community on campus, I guess. And from the last 2 years of high school that where I was essentially just this new person in a new place, not really attached at all to anybody really. I had essentially mastered that sort of floating technique of just keeping everybody at arm's length and getting along with everybody. I was again able to, in this college setting, get along with mostly everybody, but eventually I did find sort of a home amongst this friend group with about 5 other people, and that was further cemented in in 2012 when they introduced me to the woman who in 2013 would later become my girlfriend. But, of course, that did not last, as you might imagine. This is the defining relationship of my life that I talked about in so many other videos. And as is inevitable, people always take sides when a breakup happens. And in this period came probably the thing that, was the straw that broke the camel's back, essentially. And it was the experience that essentially very quickly destroyed my last bit of interest at all in friendships and sort of made me into the person that I am now and have been for some time. So, a little bit of backstory here. My ex and I had not told this friend group that we were a part of that we were dating. She said that initially it was because she didn't want to be compared to the other couple that was in that friend group, but I also think that it was partially because she didn't like that I was unemployed and had left school, and which was something that she was always a little bit snobby about. If I had to say something negative, that would probably be the thing that came to mind about her. But we hadn't told people that we were dating by her request. I mean, I was initially okay with it at the beginning, but I sort of had tired of the secrecy and sort of the nagging sense that I was an object of shame in her mind, regardless of the other justifications she gave to supplement, that appearance. But anyway, we hadn't told anybody, and I only told them after we had broken up initially. So, at the very beginning, right when I told them after we had, sort of split initially, they were kind of supportive of me. I vividly remember, sitting in the pool at that couple's apartment in June, and them telling me all sorts of embarrassing stories about my ex. Weird things, because they had been friends with her since childhood, or two of them had. So, they told me weird things that she did as a kid, times when she'd acted weird in public. They said that she used to like make cat noises or something when she was like younger, which is, I mean, I guess it's weird, but it's like it's something that isn't out of the realm of possibility for a young, like a young teenager or a even younger person. So essentially, and it was weird because it was, one of these people in this couple, the guy, he was normally a pretty quiet person, but even he got in on this. So essentially what they were doing was, on this June day, after I told them that, that she and I had broken up, and also told them that we had been together at all, they essentially went through great pains to paint a picture of this woman, their friend, who was not mentally stable, in an effort to make me feel better. They weren't just trying to comfort me, they were literally trying to, do character assassination on her, which is terrible. But then days later, after they talked to her, again, this was, I guess, my mistake telling them at all, but I guess I was sort of just distraught and not thinking, as coldly and as detachedly as I needed to have been at that point. But after days later, after they talked to her, then they all started contacting me, saying, relaying messages for her, while I was continually trying to contact her to try to salvage the relationship, and she was just completely ignoring me. So once they started trying to play relationship coaches and telling me to essentially give up on this relationship that they had with this person that they had literally just character assassinated days before, I essentially blocked them all on Facebook and never spoke to them, any of them ever again, deleted their texts, blocked their numbers, etc., etc. And, I guess at that point, I just lost all interest in friendship, because I realized that no matter, how deep of a connection you think you have, and this was after, like three and a half years of being friends with these people. So, I realized at that point that, no matter how long of a connection you have with them, and of course, like I said, my ex's connection with these people, or two of them, goes back to a childhood. So no matter how long of a connection you have, they will turn on you. And, when push comes to shove, most friends, just like these friends, are quick to turn on anybody and essentially just go whichever way the wind is blowing. When I confided in them that, we had been together, that we had broken up, like I said, instead of simply comforting me, they aired her embarrassing secrets to me. And then they turned on me when the wind shifted the opposite direction. And, even though they had just painted her as unstable, they suddenly were doing the exact same to me and reinforcing that idea in her head. So that essentially was the experience that made me give up on friendship as a concept, and destroyed my last little inkling of interest that I might be somebody who might have a a friend group that would go, for years and years and into my much later life. And ever since then, I have been pretty much isolated in terms of real life relationships. But I have wound up, in moving on to the next phase of my, background narrative here. I have wound up in several groups online because I play an MMO. So, you eventually, when you play an MMO for a long time, you join a guild or you join a clan or whatever your particular MMO of choice calls it, and you get on Discord, get on TeamSpeak or what have you, and essentially just you get to know these people sort of on a surface level, but you get to know a lot of little individual different things about them over the course of a few years. But the capriciousness of the friendship that I discovered previously in real life is mostly evident there as well, and probably even more pronounced considering that it is just, at the end of the day, like, the surface level online relationships. Like back in 2017 early 2018, I lost a friend group in the form of a guild that I had joined in this MMO, a guild that I had helped build from the ground up. Because the main leader of that guild, I was sort of like a secondary guy. The main leader of that guild had to take a break mostly and stop playing the game, so I was left in sort of a leadership role. And all these people that were in the guild with me, with whom I had gamed for the better part of 5 years at that point, all eventually turned on me. It was like we were this net of friends, but the only thing holding together the net or the web was this main leader guy. So all these people that I assumed had some kind of bond with me, they had really only ever been satellite friends who, in the absence of the main leader who joined us all together initially, didn't really have as much feeling for me without that association to connect us. They had essentially, unbeknownst to me mostly, been just people who tolerated me in order to get their time in with the main guy, which was not readily evident. And for those of you who want a little bit more detail, it all began with this little sycophant who you might remember from some of my obviously Jesus videos, not necessarily back in the day, but the ones I made, when I was just, throwing PUBG gameplays and whatever on there when I first came back to YouTube, sort of coinciding with the original return or the original creation of the Patreon around that same time. You might remember a guy named Hat Simulator who was in a few of those videos, and essentially he was in that MMO guild with me. But that MMO it's not a particularly big one. It's Guild Wars 2. It's not like, it's World v World in Guild Wars 2, if you know what that means. So there's not a particularly big group of people who still play that game mode. So essentially what happened is this kid is 4 years younger than me or something. He was essentially taken in by the elite crowd on the Discord, on the private Discord for the World v Worlders of that MMO. And I had problems with these people because of their elitist attitudes. They're the people who fucking still think Pepe the Frog is funny, and just they're fake PMA. They post racist shit in their fucking Discords and then act all indignant when when they have to moderate their more public facing Discord. But anyway, these people are just terrible fucking elitist hypocrites, and essentially this little sycophantic kid who had glommed on to me back in the day essentially started to realize that maybe his time glomming on to me was over, and he wanted to glom on to this other group of people. So he saw an opportunity to move on from me to this other group, and essentially within our guild that we were both in, he started driving a rift between me and the rest of the guild, spreading the lies essentially that those people, those elitist people, have been putting out about me for months for entirely different reasons. And because he essentially didn't need me anymore for his ego, and everybody in the guild, because the connection really was just a connection by proxy, they were more than happy to oblige him and enable him to spread those rumors and eventually dissolve the guild pretty much over the course of a day or two. And funnily enough, if you want to know the true nature of this person's character, literally the day after I kicked him and most of these other people from that guild, he followed Woody's gamertag on Twitter, which I think is probably like the cherry on top of justifying my initial perception, or my eventual perception of him. Not my initial perception of him, but that's the thing about sycophants. They use you up essentially, or they get to wherever you can take them, and then they jump. Like they're literally parasites. But anyway, as these things have happened, the less I feel surprised by betrayals like this, no matter how minor. Honestly, the less I am surprised about it, the better I think I'll feel. I don't believe in cutting people out of your life instantly in romantic relationships where you've committed to each other, but by not committing to these people in any real way and keeping all these non-romantic relationships at arm's length and, able to be disconnected at a moment's notice, I have essentially gained immunity to the inevitable dissolution of these relationships. Because again, like I said, even this friend group that I, really valued, that I formed in college, or that I was part of in college, I blocked these people and stopped talking to them overnight. And already at that point in my life, even though it was kind of like, it was a big event for me and led to some very, and was sort of like the beginning of some very traumatic events for me, even then I really didn't regret it, because I think that, at that point, they had just become a burden, and I recognized that they were an impedance to my, salvaging that relationship, because they had involved themselves, unfortunately, because I made the decision to open up to them. But yeah, that was the time where I realized that, people can literally turn on a dime. And these are people I never thought would pivot on me in that severe of a way, ever. And once they had, though, I realized what had to be done, even at that early stage, before I became, much more traumatized. But yeah, I think that I think you're better off if you were able to do that with your non-romantic relationships. But I do not support, I want to go on record as saying, I do not support the instant drop of supposedly toxic people in romantic relationships, because, a lot of times friends will counsel you to drop toxic people out of your life. But when it comes to relationship, is it a toxic person or is it toxic behavior that can be rectified? And I think that we already have enough lessening of commitment to relationships these days because of online dating culture, which I could probably make another video about sometime later. But yeah, I think that, when it comes to real romantic relationships that you've made a real commitment to, it needs to be different. But as far as friends, as far as people other than the one person that you want to spend your life with, I think you're much better off treating people as expendable, and never doing what I did and being surprised when they turn on you. I don't know if this ideology, though, I don't know if this can work for all people, or if it can only work for somebody who started off introverted and never really had any reason to explore anything to the contrary. I've always thought my brain, even as an introvert, must be wired very differently to most people, that I really only want or need one person in a romantic relationship as a support system in life other than myself, which is usually what, psychologists tell you is the function of a friend group. You want to have, at least like 5 close friends for a support system that you can count on. I don't know that, this would work for somebody who was more extroverted and, needed that support system more than I did. I think that maybe I was especially prepared for it due to the fact that I'm an only child, and I grew up essentially with no support system, and from a very early age was, learning to, even if I wasn't thriving, surviving. I was surviving under, this toxic environment between my two parents. So, I don't know that this could work for everybody, but I think there is a universal truth that, especially with these large, 4 or 5 people, groups of friends, anything larger than 2 people, really, I honestly think this can really happen, and it's really a much larger chance than a 1-to-1, binary friendship. I think that in these larger friend groups, people can always be convinced to betray and take sides, or be more loyal in some way to one person than another when push comes to shove, which is why I think binary relationships are so appealing to me, because you have no other obligations. Like in a romantic relationship, you literally just make the other person equally as important in your life as you, and they do that for you. And as long as it's reciprocal, then nothing will ever come between you two, as long as you really internalize that idea. And that is not true for these large, person webbed groups of friendships, because there's always a weak link in the web, or the chain, or whatever metaphor you want to use. So essentially, fast forward to today, it's essentially been almost 6 years since I've had an in real life friend, and I honestly don't feel like I'm missing out on anything except for a tragic vulnerability that will probably be exploited, and I will never be naive about thinking that won't happen ever again. Because, you know, the few times in my life I've been part of a group that I thought would never dissolve, and I'd be sitting on a porch with and being old one day, like, you know, they talk about in How I Met Your Mother. You know, every time I thought that was going to happen, or really the only one time that I thought that was going to happen, I ultimately had to cut those people out of my life over the course of 5 minutes. And I think I was better for it. So I don't want to go through that again. You know, and speaking of that Guild Wars 2 MMO guild, I thought I was going to go to the wedding of two of the people in that guild, and yet they turned on me in the course of an hour. So, and everything, it was funny, honestly. Let me reminisce for a bit. It was funny because they literally, it was almost as if they had a backlog of grievances that they all came to air about me that they never aired, or they never had the balls, I guess. Well, that's toxic masculinity language, so don't let me use that. They never had the courage to air any of these to me, you know, in person over the years, over the almost 5 years that we were in that guild together. And yet, all in one day, they suddenly became the most important things in the world, when nothing really had changed. It was simply an optics thing. But yeah, that was, I will never fall for that again. Everything is, you know, as much as I might enjoy playing games with people, they can all go in a second if they have to. You know, especially when forming relationships as adults, though, you know, trying to form friendships as a person my age, people are not invested in keeping adult friendships, or friendships formed as adults, alive over their romances, over their careers, over their education, over anything else. You know, people don't even, like I talked about earlier in the video, people don't even really take pains these days to sustain romantic relationships through hardships these days, thanks to the, you know, constant, you know, replaceable dating culture, thanks to, you know, Tinder and OkCupid and Hinge and all that shit. So to think that, you know, friendships formed as adults would fare better is just completely unfounded. People don't even care about their romantic relationships. Why would they care about you if you're a friend they've had for a year or two as an adult? At this point, I think that, you know, as a person my age, 26, unless you have a friend from your childhood that you have a really strong bond with, which I do not, I think that you're pretty much fucked, and you're just going to have the friends you have. All the friends you have are just going to be people that you either work with, or you live near, or what have you, and you enjoy the same things, and you see each other at the bar or whatever. I don't think it's going to get any deeper than that, with the exception of, you know, rare cases, I suppose. You can never account for everything, but I think that, you know, if you had to take if I were a betting man and I had to take a guess whether or not people my age would form long-lasting, lifelong friendships starting at my age or around this age, I would not place a bet on that. I would not stake my money on that, because, like I said, people don't even care about their relationships. They let them drop, they let them lag, they, you know, they have a fucking, you know, no sense of commitment to romances, to people that they ostensibly want to spend the rest of their lives with, and yet they go on and you know, they talk about, you know, people talk about having deep friendships, but that's just not a real thing. That's just not a thing that is imprinted on this in this current generation, I think. And obviously, like I said, that varies based on people's childhoods and whatnot. You might have a strong friend from back then, but I don't think you're going to be forming any reasonable relationships that last many, many years at 26. And, you know, it does, I guess this video, more than most of mine, sounds kind of cliche and edgy as shit, but I do strongly encourage, rather than trying to, you know, have these friends who can ultimately become vulnerabilities, I strongly encourage and promote the formation of a single strong relationship over attempting several lesser ones. I think that's probably the best option for most people. I don't know whether it would, you know, actually appeal to most people, but I think that if you want to be cold and calculating about that, I think it's probably the best, you know, bang for your buck, or the best time investment, if I had to say. And as for whether online relationships can ever substitute for in real life ones, I think, you know, for me, they're fine, as, you know, they're actually quite similar on online relationships to, you know, the friendships that I've had for most of my life. And that's because, you know, my friendships, real and online, have always been characterized by, you know, having virtually no expectations of each other, just, you know, having a common purpose and a common interest at a common time, and just being there and, you know, go until it dies, essentially. If you're looking to form a deeper relationship, though, I do think you definitely need the in real life component of having a romantic or a friendship online. I do not advocate for online only relationships or even really long distance relationships. I think that those are not likely to work out because when we're young, when we're very very young children, all our relationships go back to being in meat space in real life with all these different people, your parents, your peers, etc. Before you get your phone, before you get your tablet, what have you. And it essentially becomes irreplaceable for us. And that's true even of this younger generation, I think, even though they get iPads for, iPad apps for kids or whatever at a very young age. I do think that our earliest relationships are always going to be tied to that in real life presence. So if you want to form a deep relationship, I do think that you need to look elsewhere aside from online. But if your friendships, like me, in real life and otherwise, have always just been sort of at arm's length and based on common interests and being there at a common time, I really think that there's not a terrible amount of difference between IRL and online relationships in that sense. But like I said, if you're going for something deeper, I think you definitely need to look around you rather than on a dating app or even just talking to people on online. Because as I have unfortunately discovered, airing your dirty laundry and shit to to people online who have so much shit going on in their lives and have opinions about you that you might be able to see on their face if they were talking to you, but you can't because they're just on Discord or TeamSpeak or whatever. I would caution against confiding in people like that because it is risking a vulnerability. It is risking a vulnerability because there is always a scenario. It might never happen, but there is always a scenario in which that person gets pissed off at you, or you get pissed off at them, or you alienate each other for some reason or another, and they weaponize that information against you. And I've already been the victim of that realization in my romantic relationships. So I would strongly caution against doing that with people whose faces you can't even see and read, because even I'm not like a body language expert or anything. Fucking God knows that, but even then, I would rather, when telling somebody something, when confiding in somebody, I would much rather tell somebody something if I can see their face and their reaction to it and gauge just generally who they are and what they're going through, rather than having them mostly concealed and relying on their, trying to read their tone of voice over a fucking, if you're on a good connection, it's fucking 96 kilobytes per second. I don't even think that meets the transparency standard for audio, but yeah, I would caution against that. And essentially, my moral of the story here is focus on creating one really important relationship and let everything else be icing on the cake. And that might sound cynical, but it is certainly based on my empirical experience in life. That is certainly a wise decision, I think. And yeah, speaking of audio quality, though, your music recommendation for the week is Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, Architecture and Morality. This is an album. I know I said I would keep it fairly recent, but this is a fucking fantastic thing that I had never heard about until recently, until I was Shazamming a bunch of songs, before shows that they play over the PA, the house music and whatnot. And, I kept, getting this name, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, OMD. And so I looked up this album. It's their sort of seminal album. It's their most critically lauded, but it is fucking fantastic. Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, Architecture and Morality. Go listen to that shit. There's like an extended edition, but I think the original is like 9 tracks or something. So that's definitely worth a listen if you want to hear some, prototypical, I don't even know what you'd call it genre-wise. It's just good. It's just fucking good. But anyway, I have been obviously Jesus. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.